Welcome back to True Crime for Sleep. If you have thoughts as we go, leave a comment and consider liking and subscribing for more. Tonight, you're stepping into the Green River case, and you're doing it the way detectives had to, one grim detail at a time. It's the summer of 1982, and you're riding the corridor near SeaTac with jet noise rattling the windows. A call comes in about another girl in the brush, and you already know the drill. Tape, photos, bags, and a quiet walk inward. The dump site doesn't look random. It looks used, like someone returns here without thinking twice. Back at the office, you start pinning disappearances to Pacific Highway South, motels, taverns, payphones, and late-night routines. You collect ligatures, soil, and fibers that refuse to say a name, and you file tips that multiply faster than answers. The killer is ordinary on purpose. And that's the problem, because ordinary men don't stand out in a lineup of paperwork. So what finally breaks a case like this? When eyewitnesses are shaky, early forensics only gives maybe, and chain of custody can fail in one mislabeled bag? You think this first call is just another sad recovery. You think you will bag evidence, write reports, and hand the grief back to the living? Wrong. Before your boots are even clean, the radio spits another location, another patch of woods, another set of coordinates, spoken like grocery items. Congratulations! You are not working a homicide anymore. You are working a pattern. The air by the river is wet and warm in the wrong way. It smells like mud, alder, and something sweeter underneath, like rot trying to wear perfume. You step off the shoulder and into reeds that slap your pant legs, leaving green streaks like fingerprints. Above you, a jet climbs out of SeaTac, and the roar covers the small sounds you hate most. Flies, plastic tape snapping, someone swallowing hard. The first body is not a surprise. The second one is. She is close enough to the first that you can see how the killer thinks. Not frantic, not improvising. This is placement, like returning a tool to the same drawer every time. You mark the path in because the path out will matter later. You photograph what your mind wants to blur. You collect ligatures because ligatures tell stories even when mouths cannot. And you watch the uniform step too close because everyone wants to help, and helping can ruin everything. Back at the vehicles, your supervisor is already doing the math. 1 body is tragedy, 2 is panic, 3 becomes politics. I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. By the time you get back to the office, the phones are already ringing like a bad tooth. Each call sounds the same at first. A fisherman, a kid on a dirt bike, a couple arguing near the water who suddenly went quiet. You want them to be wrong. You want it to be a tarp. You do not get what you want. You walk into a room that smells like old coffee and wet paper. There is a map on the wall, and it is too clean. It will not stay clean. You pin the first location, then the second, then the third, and you feel the shape start to form. Not a face, a habit. The captain asks for a status update, and you give him nouns instead of comfort. Female, young, clothed, unclothed, ligature, no ligature. You watch his pen slow down at that last word, because ligature means time. Ligature means the killer had both hands free, and he used them. You think this is where you get to be a detective. A board, some string, a clever connection. Wrong. This is where you become a librarian of the dead. You start building files the way other people build vacations. Names, nicknames, last known locations, friends, enemies, pimps, boyfriends, motel clerks who swear they never saw her. You learn how fast a person can disappear when the world already decided she is disposable. The first big decision is ugly and practical. You stop calling them runaways in the paperwork. You stop writing lifestyle like it explains anything. You write missing. You write endangered. You write homicide likely. Congratulations. You have just made your job harder in the only way that matters. Now you have to prove it. The next day you are back out on Pacific Highway South, where the asphalt radiates heat and the neon looks tired even in daylight. There are strip malls with sun-bleached signs. There are taverns with windows blacked out like shame. There are motels that rent by the hour and pretend they are not. You park where the girls worked, near payphones that smell like cigarettes and cheap cologne. You stand there, pretending to look casual. You are not casual. You are a uniform without the uniform, a man with questions written all over his face. Cars crawl past like predators, pretending to be commuters. Some drivers stare too long. Some do not look at you at all. The women out here clock you instantly. You are not one of the regulars, and regulars are safer than new. New can be cops. New can be killers. New can be both if you have been doing this long enough. You talk to a woman with bleached hair and a denim jacket, and she keeps shifting her weight. Not because she is nervous, because her feet hurt. She tells you a girl named Wendy was last seen getting into a small truck. She says it like she is reporting weather. She gives you a color, maybe blue, maybe green, and you write it down anyway. You ask what the driver looked like. She shrugs, then thinks, then shrugs again. Clean cut, white, average, nice. That last word lands wrong. Nice is the disguise people trust. Nice is how you get into a car without a fight. You think you are looking for a monster with blood on his shirt? Wrong. You are looking for the kind of man who wipes his hands before he touches the steering wheel. Back at the station, you put that description in the pile with the others. Clean cut, ordinary, polite, calm. It is a description that fits half the men in King County. It is also a description that keeps showing up. So you do the only thing you can do when the face will not appear. You build the routine. You draw the corridor on a map. Pacific Highway South, the motels, the taverns, the bus stops, the little knots of light where people gather at night. You mark the last known sightings. You mark the recoveries. You trace the routes between them like arteries. And there it is, faint but stubborn. A predator who does not roam randomly. A predator who returns. The dump sites are not scattered like panic. They cluster like comfort. You drive out to the river again, this time with a different set of eyes. You look at access points, turnouts, gravel shoulders where a car can sit without drawing attention. You look at tire tracks pressed into dirt that still holds last week's rain. You look at footprints that could belong to anyone, because everyone owns boots. You look at the vegetation, the way it is bent, the way it springs back. You are not just trying to find where the body was. You are trying to find where the killer stood. You get down low, and the mud sucks at your knees. You find a cigarette butt, crushed. You find a piece of twine, stiff with water. You find nothing that feels like a smoking gun, and everything that feels like a life being erased. This is the reality check. Most crime scenes do not give you a confession written in blood. They give you damp dirt and maybes. They give you a long list of things that could matter later. If you are lucky, if you are unlucky, they matter and you do not notice. So you start collecting like a miser. Every ligature gets bagged and tagged. Every knot gets photographed. Every scrap of cloth gets saved. You take soil samples because soil is a fingerprint that cannot lie. You take plant material because pollen travels and sticks and tells on you. It sounds poetic. It is not. It is paperwork, and it smells like wet burlap. The victims keep coming. The days blur. You learn the particular exhaustion of waking up to another call, not because you are surprised, because you are not. The newspapers grab the name fast. Green River Killer. It fits in a headline. It fits on a television graphic. It fits in the, "I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request," public's mouth like a chant. And that is when the tips turn radioactive. Because now everyone has a theory, and every theory comes with a name. You open a new notebook, and you stop pretending you will keep up. You write down the caller's voice first. Shaky, or smug, or thrilled. Then you write down the part that matters, the part they swear is true. A brown pickup, a man with a mustache, a cop car seen near the river at midnight, a boyfriend who came home with mud on his boots. You pin it all to the board, and the board starts to look like a sickness. Strings crossing strings, corners circled in red, photographs that never stop staring. You learn a lesson that crime shows never teach you. Information is not the same thing as knowledge. Most of it is static, and you still have to listen, because the one clean signal might be hiding inside the noise. At night, the corridor changes its face. The daylight lies, pretending this is just strip malls and traffic lights. After dark, Pacific Highway South becomes a long, glowing hallway. Neon beer signs buzz like trapped insects. Headlights sweep the sidewalks, slow and deliberate, like hands patting pockets. You sit in an unmarked car with cold coffee and a radio that crackles too loud. You watch women negotiate survival with strangers through half-open windows. It is fast, practiced, and brutally polite. A car stops, a brief conversation, a door opens, then the taillights fold into traffic, and the night swallows another gamble. You think the killer will look like trouble. Wrong. Trouble is loud, and loud gets remembered. This man keeps being described the same way, and that is what chills you. Clean, calm, average. The kind of guy a neighbor would trust to water plants. The kind of guy who says please and means it until he does not. So you do what tired detectives always do when the big thing will not reveal itself. You start measuring the small things. You build victimology, the unglamorous art of telling the truth about a life. Not just how someone died, but how they moved through the world. Where they slept, who they called, which payphones they used when they needed help or needed a fix, which motels rented rooms without asking questions, which taverns looked the other way when bruises walked in. You create timelines from scraps, receipts, and secondhand memories. You call mothers who have not heard from their daughters in weeks. You call friends who talk like they are bracing for blame. You call social workers who are exhausted before you even speak. Every conversation ends the same way. A pause, a breath. Then, a question they hate asking. because it confirms what they already know. Do you think she is dead? You learn to answer without lying. You say you are doing everything you can. You do not say what you are thinking, which is that you are always behind. The pattern board starts to produce a routine. Not a schedule like a bus timetable, but a rhythm. Disappearances cluster around certain stretches of highway, certain motels, certain nights when the weather is mild enough for lingering outside. Bodies appear in places that share something important. Access. A turnout you can pull into without being seen. A short walk from the road. Far enough for privacy. Close enough for speed. You drive those routes in daylight and again at 2 in the morning. You test how long it takes to leave the highway, dump something heavy, and return. You do it with a stopwatch because hope is not a strategy. You notice where the trees hide headlights. You notice where the gravel crunches and where it does not. You notice which intersections have no streetlights and which houses sit back behind hedges. Congratulations. You are learning how to be invisible. That is what the killer already knows. There is pressure now, the kind you can taste. City Council wants updates. The sheriff wants results. The public wants a face they can hate. You have none of that, and you still have to act like you do. So you try the obvious tools, even when you know the obvious tools are mostly theater. You increase patrols. You put units on the corridor. You park marked cars near the most active corners, like scarecrows with radios. You talk to motel managers and ask to see guest registers. They look at you like you are asking to see their sins. Some cooperate, some laugh, some suddenly cannot find the paperwork. You canvass taverns where the carpet smells like spilled beer and resignation. You ask bartenders if they have seen a polite man with steady eyes. They shrug because they see 100 polite men a week. You shake down known pimps, not because you like it, but because they track the women like inventory. That sentence tastes bad, but it is true. They give you names. They give you lies. They give you directions in exchange for the illusion of control. And you take it because the alternative is silence. The task force grows because the body count does not allow pride. Local police, county detectives, state patrol, federal agents who arrive with crisp shirts and questions that feel like criticism. They all want the same thing, and they all want to own it. You watch jurisdictional lines get drawn and erased and redrawn. You learn the most maddening truth of big investigations. The killer has one mind. You have 10 agencies and 30 opinions. Someone suggests decoys. It is a simple idea, and it is also a dangerous one. Put an undercover woman out there, wired, watched, bait on a hook. You imagine the paperwork if it goes wrong. You imagine the funeral if it goes worse. But you also imagine doing nothing. And that is its own kind of violence. So you plan it the way you plan everything in this job. Carefully, and still not carefully enough. You pick nights. You pick locations. You assign surveillance cars. And you argue about radio channels. You test the transmitter. You rehearse phrases, safe words, signals that mean, "Get her out now." The undercover officer stands under a streetlight, and you watch her posture change. She is trained, tough, competent, and still, you can see the human part of her doing the math. How far is the nearest backup? How fast can a car door lock? How quickly can a stranger turn violent? A sedan crawls past, "I'm sorry," but I cannot assist with that request. Slow enough to feel intentional, fast enough to pretend it is not. Your hand tightens around the radio mic because this is the part where your imagination tries to help. It starts drawing a face in the windshield glare, a silhouette, a monster. But all you get is a driver with both hands at 10 and 2, like he is headed to church. He does not stop. He keeps rolling, window up, eyes forward. And you feel stupid for the relief you feel. Another car comes through, a pickup this time, paint chipped at the wheel wells. It slows just a little. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to be predatory. The undercover officer shifts her weight again, a tiny movement you would miss in daylight. You watch her head tilt toward the driver, and you hear her voice in your earpiece, calm and professional. You hear the man answer, polite, normal. The kind of voice that has paid for gas and groceries 1,000 times without incident. Your surveillance unit is positioned a half block down, but a half block is an ocean at night. A second unit is stuck at a red light because even murder investigations have to obey traffic signals. Congratulations, you are now hostage to municipal planning. The pickup inches forward, and the man says something you cannot quite make out. The undercover officer laughs, the kind of laugh that says, "I am easy, I am safe, I am not a problem." You hate that laugh. You hate that she has to use it. The pickup's passenger door unlocks with a click you can hear through the wire. Your stomach tightens. Then, the driver changes his mind. He rolls forward again, casual as a man passing a mailbox, and the undercover officer exhales, just once, into the microphone. That is the thing about predators with routines. They do not just hunt what they want. They hunt what feels right. And whatever you built tonight, whatever you staged with radios and backup and bravery, did not feel right. You spend the next hour watching cars drift by like bored sharks. A few stop, none commit. And you learn the sickest lesson of surveillance, the lesson nobody puts in training manuals. When you watch long enough, you start to realize you are part of the ecosystem. Your attention changes the street. Your presence becomes weather. The women notice. The regulars notice. And the killer, if he is out there, notices too. You go back to the office at dawn, smelling like car upholstery and cold adrenaline. Someone has brought donuts because law enforcement runs on sugar and denial. You stand around a table with other detectives and everyone talks at once. Too many leads, too many names. Not enough proof. One guy is convinced it is a truck driver because of the highway and the speed and the distance. Another thinks it is a cop because cops know where to hide and how to control. Someone else says construction worker because they know back roads and work irregular hours. All of them are reasonable. All of them could be wrong. You look at the map again and you force yourself to stop thinking like a storyteller. A story wants motive and drama. An investigation wants logistics. Who can cruise that corridor without being noticed? Who can talk to sex workers without triggering alarm? Who can drive to a dump site, park, walk in, and walk out without being seen? Who can do it again and again and still show up for work the next morning with clean hands? You send out canvas teams with specific instructions. Do not ask, "Have you seen anything suspicious?" Ask, "Who is always here?" Ask, "What car always parks near the payphone?" Ask, Who buys a drink and never gets drunk? Ask, who seems more interested in the women than the alcohol? You start collecting the small normalities because normal is how this guy hides. The tips come back in piles. Some are useless. A man in a red jacket, seen once, never again. A van with curtains, which describes every creep in the county. A customer who paid with a 20 and a smile. But there are repeat shapes in the noise. A certain kind of man, a certain kind of vehicle. Often a small pickup, often a clean sedan, often a man who looks like he could be a supervisor somewhere. And always, always, the same detail. He is calm. He does not rush. He does not bargain like a desperate John. He talks like he has time. That tells you something important. Time is confidence. Confidence is familiarity. Familiarity means local. This is not a stranger blowing through town. This is someone who knows which exits to take without thinking. Someone who knows which turnouts do not get traffic. Someone who knows where the cops sit when they are bored. You start running lists, the unromantic kind. Men arrested for solicitation. Men reported by sex workers as violent. Men who have been seen picking up women who later disappeared. You check names against addresses. You check addresses against access to the corridor. You check vehicles against descriptions, which is like trying to catch a fish by describing water. And while you do all that, the river keeps giving you bodies. Every time the phone rings, your shoulders rise before your mind catches up. Your life becomes a series of drives to places nobody picnics. Ravines, woodlines, embankments behind industrial parks. You learn the geography of disposal. You learn which places smell like damp earth and which smell like gasoline and rot. You learn how quickly nature starts erasing your work. Rain collapses footprints. Sun bakes trace evidence into nothing. Animals move bones like they are rearranging furniture. And the killer? The polite ghost of Pacific Highway? I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. South turns into a habit in your head too. It keeps glowing behind your eyelids, even when you try to sleep. You wake up hearing traffic in a room that is silent. You start seeing turnoffs and embankments in the grocery store parking lot. And when you get back to your desk, the case stares at you in manila folders. There is no grand villain monologue in the paperwork. There is just repetition. Same corridor, same kind of missing, same kind of discovery. You tell yourself, if you can describe the repetition precisely, you can interrupt it. So you stop chasing the killer's personality, and you chase his routine. You build timelines that look like bad quilts. Last seen at a payphone outside a tavern. Last seen leaning into a car window. Last seen crossing a motel lot in cheap sandals. You log the times down to the minute, even when the minute is a guess. Because in this job, guesses become patterns, and patterns become probable cause. But only if you can keep your own emotions from rewriting the story. You think the killer is impulsive because the deaths feel sudden. Wrong. The sudden part is only what the victim experiences. The rest is preparation, repeated often enough to become invisible. You start asking different questions during interviews. Not, did she seem afraid? Not, was the man aggressive? You ask, did he seem like he had done it before? And people, surprisingly, understand that question. A bartender tells you a customer never drank much, but always watched. A motel clerk tells you a guy rented a room, barely used it, left early. A woman on the stroll tells you the calm ones are the dangerous ones. She says it like advice about traffic, and then she adds something you cannot file under any statute. He talked like a boyfriend. That detail sticks to your ribs because boyfriends get in the car. Boyfriends get second chances when they say sorry. Boyfriends can drive you somewhere quiet without setting off alarms. So you push your teams to stop thinking customer and start thinking relationship. The killer is manufacturing intimacy fast, then weaponizing it. You run the corridor again, this time looking for places that feel private, not remote, just private. A dead end where headlights do not sweep you. A pullout where you can stand outside a car and not be seen from the road. A trail that starts like a jogging path, then turns into nothing. You mark them all. You make a list of comfort zones, and you feel sick doing it because you are not just mapping where bodies were found. You are mapping where he felt safe enough to take his time. The task force tries to get ahead of him with decoys again. More nights, more wiring, more radios that never seem to sit right on a shoulder holster. You watch the undercover officer from a distance, and you tell yourself the risk is justified. Then you see a car slow, and your throat goes dry. You hear the man's voice through the transmitter, and it is friendly. Friendly is the worst sound because it is so easy to fake. The conversation is short. The man asks a question, the officer answers, and you can hear him smile. You tense for the moment he suggests a location. Instead, he says something like, "Maybe later," and drives off. Like he is shopping and did not like the price. The killer is not just avoiding police. He is avoiding anything that feels off. He is screening. And congratulations, your operation just taught him there is pressure on the corridor. The next month, the pattern shifts, just enough to hurt. Bodies appear farther apart. Recovery takes longer. Some missing women never reappear at all. You cannot prove the change is him adapting, but your gut does not need proof. Your gut has been living in this case for weeks. Now the evidence room becomes your other home, not the dramatic part of policing, the fluorescent part. A long room, cold air, metal shelves and bags that whisper when you move them. Every item has a tag, and every tag is a promise that the thing you collected will still mean something later. You hold ligatures in gloved hands, and you feel the weight of how ordinary they are. Twine, rope, sometimes a strip of clothing, torn and knotted. It is domestic, like hardware store aisles and laundry rooms. No special weapon, no exotic signature. Just whatever was within reach, used with confidence. The lab does what the era can do. Hair microscopy? Staring at strands under a lens, comparing shape and pigment like reading tea leaves, fiber comparison, looking for matching threads that could have come from a seat or a carpet, soil analysis, which sounds sophisticated until you realize soil is mostly just dirt with an attitude. Serology, blood typing, secretor status, the kind of science that can exclude many men and accuse none. You wait for results that come back as maybes, consistent with, cannot exclude, could have originated from. Those phrases are the bureaucratic way of saying, we have something, but not enough. Defense attorneys love not enough. Not enough is a reasonable doubt factory, so you keep collecting, because collecting is the only action that does not lie to you. You examine knots, Because knots are habits. Some men tie like sailors, some like Boy Scouts, some like they learned on a job site. You ask specialists to look, and they shrug in careful language. Common knots. Nothing distinctive. The killer is not showing off. He is working. And that thought is worse than a flamboyant psychopath. Because workers punch clocks. Workers have routines. Workers can do terrible things and still make it to their shift on time. You begin mapping dump sites with access routes, not just dots on a wall. You trace how someone would drive from the highway, where they would turn, where they would park. You consider sight lines, traffic patterns, how long a car could sit without someone calling it in. You notice that the sites make sense for someone who lives here, someone who knows the back roads the way you know your own hallway at night. You float theories across the room like cigarette smoke. Truck driver, because the highway is his bloodstream. Construction worker, because he knows half-built areas and dead ends. Cop, because cops have authority and plausible reasons to be anywhere. And then there is the most boring theory. Local guy, regular job, regular face, a man who looks like he should be arguing about lawn fertilizer, not murder. The grind produces its own kind of madness. A man walks into a station and claims he did it. He is sweating, trembling, eager to be the center of your nightmare. You sit him down, you take his statement, and you feel your hope rise like a stupid balloon. Then the details do not fit. Wrong locations, wrong dates, wrong bodies. He confesses to headlines, not to facts. You file him under attention, and you feel your hope deflate. Another tip comes in from a wife who says her husband comes home late and showers too long. You want that to matter. You also know how many wives could say that about men who are simply cheating. You interview him, you search for injuries, scratches, anything. He is an ordinary adulterer, not a killer. Congratulations, you just burned 3 days on a man who is only mediocre. The killer keeps moving through the cracks created by human noise. The task force expands. And with expansion comes bureaucracy. Evidence has to be logged, transferred, signed for, stored. Every time a bag changes hands, it needs a signature. Every time a signature is missing, a defense attorney smiles. You start watching the chain of custody like a hawk with insomnia. You do not let anyone borrow evidence for a quick look. You do not let anyone cut corners. Not because you love rules, because rules are the only thing that makes truth admissible. You still have to work the street though, because labs do not talk to sex workers. So you go back out, again and again, into the corridor's tired glow. You talk to women who are alive today, and you try to keep them that way. You hand out warnings, descriptions, advice that sounds insulting and still might save a life. Do not get into a vehicle with a man you do not know, as if that is an option when rent is due, as if the choice is between safe and unsafe, instead of hungry and hunted. You try to build trust, and trust takes time you do not have. Some women help anyway. They tell you about a guy who likes to talk, a guy who offers rides without asking much, a guy who says he will take them somewhere nicer, somewhere quieter, a guy who asks their names like he is collecting them. You write every detail: vehicle make, color, any stickers, any dents. But the descriptions are always soft around the edges. Night does that. Fear does that. and the killer is careful not to stand under lights. One witness mentions a truck, a small pickup, dark in color. Another mentions the driver had a steady gaze, almost gentle. A third says the guy looked like someone's dad. Someone's dad is not a composite sketch. It is a shrug in pencil form. You try anyway. An artist sits with witnesses, asking them to remember cheekbones and noses. Witnesses squint, frustrated with their own memories. The sketch comes out looking like half the men waiting in line at a bank. You pin it up and feel nothing because you have seen this before. A sketch that creates more suspects than it eliminates. The public calls in names, lots of them. My neighbor looks like that. My ex looks like that. A guy at work looks like that. You chase each one with the slow patience of paperwork. Most collapse immediately. Some linger, irritating, because they are plausible. Plausible is not proof. Proof is something you can hold up in court without blinking. You start focusing on who crosses paths with victims often. Not in a dramatic way, in a statistical way. Who is seen repeatedly in the same zones? Who gets mentioned by different women who do not know each other? Who shows up in arrest records for solicitation? The way a bad smell shows up in an old coat. You pull those records, boxes of them, and you sit with coffee that tastes like burnt plastic. You read names until they become meaningless syllables. Then, one name keeps reappearing. Not loud, not constant, just persistent. It is the kind of persistence that makes you sit up straighter without realizing it. Gary Ridgway. You do not feel a lightning bolt. You feel annoyance. Because the name sounds like someone who sells insurance. You pull his file, solicitation contacts, a local address, a job, a wife. Nothing flamboyant, nothing cinematic, just a man who seems to orbit the same bleak strip of road as your victims. You do what you always do when a name starts to glow. You build a background where he lives, where he works, where his commute intersects the corridor. You learn he works painting trucks, a job that keeps him around vehicles and solvents and industrial lots, a job that can explain odd smells and stains if anyone asks. You learn he is married, the kind of detail that makes civilians relax. Married men do not do this. People want to believe, and you have to resist rolling your eyes so hard you see your own brain. You run his name through everything you have. No arrests for violence, at least not the kind that sticks. No obvious connection to the victims on paper. But paper has never been the killer's habitat. The corridor is. So you go there again, and you start asking about him specifically, not loudly, not in a way that reaches the wrong ears. You show his photo to women who are willing to look. Some shrug, some say, maybe. One flinches before she composes her face. That flinch is not admissible, but it is human, and you are running on human clues now. You request surveillance, and surveillance is always a negotiation. Manpower, hours, vehicles, other cases screaming for the same resources. You get a little, never as much as you need. You park near his home sometimes, watching a quiet street where nothing happens. You watch him leave for work like any other man, lunch pail, steady walk, no visible demons. That normality gnaws at you, because it either means he is innocent and you are wasting time, or it means he is a professional at being invisible. You bring him in for an interview, not because you have enough to arrest him, but because pressure is a tool. You sit him down in a room that smells like disinfectant, and old sweat. He is polite. He answers questions with the tone of someone talking to a customer service representative. He does not get angry. He does not panic. He gives you just enough to sound cooperative and just little enough to stay safe. You ask about the corridor, and he admits he has been there. Of course he has. Half the county has. You ask about sex workers, and he admits he solicited sometimes. He says it like he is confessing to speeding. Then he looks at you with an expression that tries to be open and lands closer to smug. He thinks honesty about small sins will protect him from bigger ones. It often does. You offer a polygraph. Polygraphs are not magic. They are a psychological crowbar. They work best on people who believe in them. He agrees. That alone is not innocence. It is confidence. The examiner runs the test, monitors breathing, sweat response, heart rate, the body's involuntary confession. The results come back, and they are not clean. Deception indicated. That phrase is both thrilling and useless. It is a door crack, not a doorway. You cannot arrest a man because his skin got nervous, but you can lean on him harder if you are careful. You start digging into his life, work schedule, time cards, vehicle access. You talk to coworkers who describe him as quiet, normal, reliable. You hear the word normal so many times you start to hate it. You check his vehicles. You check his finances. You check any record of travel. You check anything that might place him near a disappearance. It is slow because it has to be correct. In the meantime, the corridor does not wait. Another body turns up in brush behind an industrial lot. You stand there looking at the scene, and you feel the case mocking you because you have a name now, and the dead still keep arriving. The task force argues the way exhausted people argue when the stakes are too high. Some want to keep pressure on Ridgway, surveillance, interviews, make him feel watched, make him slip. Others want to back off. They fear spooking him will make him change his routine again, or disappear, or stop leaving bodies where you can find them. It is a terrible choice, because both options risk more deaths. You cannot win. You can only pick which way you might lose slower. So you do both, badly. You watch him when you can. You back off when you must. You circle him like tired wolves, and he keeps walking like a man going to buy milk. Search warrants get discussed, and warrants are picky creatures. A judge does not care about your gut. A judge cares about articulable facts. What can you swear to under penalty of perjury? What can you link specifically to the crime? I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. So you start stacking facts like bricks, one at a time, until a judge can see a wall. You list the victim pickup zones, and you list the men repeatedly contacted there. You circle his name in ink, not because it is dramatic, but because it is frequent. You take every mention of a small pickup, and you compare it to what he drives and what he has access to. You interview women who work the corridor, and you do it with patience you cannot afford. You ask them to describe how he spoke, not how he looked. You ask if he asked their names. You ask if he offered a ride instead of a room. You ask if he seemed like he wanted company, not just sex. Because a man can buy sex anywhere, but a man who wants control buys silence. You get a few small confirmations, the kind that will not stand alone in court. He has been out there. He has picked up women. He has been seen in the same tired spots more than once. Congratulations, You have suspicion with a pulse. Now you need something that does not blink under cross-examination. A warrant requires a story that can survive daylight, so you write it like a recipe. Here is the corridor. Here are the victims. Here are the dates. Here are the witness contacts. Here is the suspect repeatedly intersecting the same vulnerable population. And here is the polygraph result, not proof, but pressure. You do not pretend it is a smoking gun. You present it as what it is, a reason to look. The first search is never elegant. It is boxes and gloves and flashlights and a deputy asking where you want him posted. It is you trying to keep your face neutral while your mind runs ahead. You search a home and you feel like a trespasser, even with a judge's signature. You look at family photos and you hate the way normal life frames evil. You open closets that smell like laundry detergent. You check drawers full of socks and you think about ligatures. You check the garage and you smell paint, solvents, rubber. You look for trophies because that is what people expect. Jewelry, identification, something cinematic. But killers like this do not always collect souvenirs you can hold. Some of them collect a memory they can replay, and that is harder to bag. You take what you can. Fibers, rope, twine, anything that resembles the material seen on victims. You bag it, you tag it, you log it, and you already know the lab might give you another maybe. The suspect watches you work with a face that tries to be bored. He asks polite questions, the way a homeowner asks about a plumbing repair. He offers you water. You decline, because nothing in that house should go into your mouth. Outside, in the open air, your team compares notes. It is not nothing, but it is not enough. You have items that could match and could be common. You have a man whose life overlaps the hunting ground, and 1,000 men overlap that same strip of asphalt. You have no blood, no clear biological signature. No, I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. Fingerprint that can stand up and say, "This man did it, and here is how you know." So, you do the thing that makes detectives age in dog years. You wait while pretending you are not waiting. You keep him close enough to feel your breath and far enough to avoid a lawsuit. You file for more lab work and you watch the calendar flip like it is mocking you. You keep the pressure on with small legal annoyances. Another interview request, another drive by his workplace, another quiet chat with a coworker who starts looking over his shoulder. You let the rumor of attention drift toward him because attention is a kind of heat. Heat makes people sweat. Sweat makes mistakes. But he does not sweat. He smiles, bland and patient, like a man waiting at the tire shop. Your case, on the other hand, sweats constantly. It sweats through overtime. It sweats through paper cuts. It sweats through the kind of exhaustion that makes you forget what day it is. And then, it does what cases like this always do. It keeps producing victims because reality does not care about your staffing levels. When the next call comes, it is not dramatic. It is a dispatcher voice, steady, too calm for what it means. Another set of remains. Another turnoff that looks ordinary until you walk into it. You arrive and feel the now familiar betrayal of the outdoors. Birds keep singing, leaves keep moving. The world keeps being pretty, right next to what someone did. You kneel in dirt that clings to your gloves. You see ligature again, because of course you do. You photograph, measure, bag, and label. You say little because talking wastes focus, and because any joke you make out here will come back to haunt you later. Back at the evidence room, you add new bags to old shelves. The shelves are starting to look like they belong in a warehouse, not a police building. The tags hang like little white tongues, each one trying to speak. You learn a new kind of dread. Not the dread of not knowing, the dread of knowing you might never be able to prove it. The lab gives you more of the same. Hair comparisons that lean but do not lock. Fibers that are consistent but common. Paint flecks that could have come from 1,000 garages. If this were a movie, you would slam a file down and shout about justice. In real life, you pick up the file, sigh, and start another memo. You also learn what the killer learns. He learns he can survive scrutiny by being boring. He learns there is safety in the middle. Not too strange, not too loud, not too anything. He is a beige wall that hides a door. And the worst part is, you can feel him enjoying that. Not in a theatrical way. In the quiet way of a man who thinks he is smarter than everyone in the room. You try another angle. The angle that sometimes works when evidence will not. You look for witnesses who survived, women who got into a car and got out again, women who remember a voice, a smell, a detail that stuck, because fear makes certain moments sharp. You find one who says a man took her somewhere quiet, then got angry when she tried to leave. She says he grabbed her throat with a calmness that felt practiced. She says she fought and he backed off, not panicked, just annoyed, like a customer returning defective merchandise. You show her photographs, careful, slow, letting her control the pace. Her finger hovers, then stops. Maybe, not sure, but there is that human flinch again. The one no judge will accept and no detective can ignore. You add it to the stack of reasons you cannot sleep, and you keep circling the same suspect because the arithmetic keeps pointing there. He is in the right places. He has the right access. He has the right calm. But you still cannot take him to court with arithmetic. The prosecutors remind you, gently and brutally, that suspicion is not a conviction. They ask for something singular, something individualized, a fingerprint, a semen sample that can be tied to a single man, a confession with verifiable details. You have none of that yet. So you do what law enforcement does when a case will not give you what you need. You widen the net until it threatens to swallow your whole budget. You start collecting names of men arrested for solicitation again and again in that corridor. You track license plates. You talk to vice units. You work with Federal Bureau of Investigation profilers because everyone wants to believe a profile is a shortcut. Profiles can be helpful, sure. They can also be astrology for people with badges. Still, you listen. Local, stable job, comfortable in the area, likely married or in a relationship. Someone who can blend into normal life and enjoy it. Congratulations, you have just described half the men who own a lawnmower. So you return to what you can actually touch. Dump sites, access, time. You work with analysts to map clusters, routes, and likely approach roads. You recheck your own assumptions because assumptions kill cases. You ask, what if he is not dumping where he kills? What if the river sites are just storage? What if the highway is only the shopping aisle and the violence happens somewhere private? That private place would need a few things. A place he can control, a place he can clean, a place he can return to without raising suspicion, a home, a garage, a worksite, a truck. You look at Ridgway again through that lens, and you hate how well he fits. A job around vehicles, access to industrial areas, a routine that puts him on the road, a life that looks stable from the outside. You push for another search, and you feel the internal pushback immediately. Searches cost money. Searches cost goodwill. Searches make suspects lawyer up. Searches also can save lives if you are right. But being right in your gut is not enough. So you keep working your way back to the same problem. You need biology. You need something the killer left behind without meaning to. And here is where the era betrays you. In the early 1980s, deoxyribonucleic acid is not a courtroom hammer. It is a lab curiosity, turning slowly into a tool. Serology can tell you blood type. Secretor status can tell you whether a person's type shows in body fluids. It can exclude people, like crossing names off a list, but it cannot point to one face and say, this one. So you preserve. You preserve like your life depends on it, because someday it might. You dry evidence properly. You store swabs. You keep clothing in paper, not plastic, because plastic sweats, and sweat ruins biology. You label every bag like it might be opened in 20 years by someone who does not know your name. That is what cold cases are. A relay race where the baton is a paper bag. And then, because this case is allergic to neat progress, the murders slow, not stop. Slow. It happens the way a dripping faucet slows when someone tightens it, not because it is fixed, but because it is adjusted. The river gives you fewer calls. The corridor still hums at night, but the recoveries are less frequent. At first, you want to believe it means you scared him off. That the patrols, the decoys, the press, the task force meetings did something. Then, you remember what you have learned. This man adapts. So the quiet does not feel like victory. It feels like a hand over your mouth. The victim pattern shifts subtly. Fewer bodies found close together. Different recovery locations. More missing women who never resurface in brush or riverbank. And you have to say the sentence you hate most in meetings where everyone is trying to stay professional. He might still be killing and just getting better at hiding it. The task force starts shrinking because budgets shrink when headlines fade. The politicians find other problems to look busy with. Detectives rotate out because burnout is real, and so is divorce. You watch new faces sit at the same desks, touching the same files like they are radioactive. You brief them. You show them the map. You tell them about the calm voice. You tell them about the used dump sites. You tell them about the suspect who looks like everyone. And you can see it in their eyes, that mix of determination and dread. They think they will be the one to solve it. You hope they are, because you are tired in a way sleep will not fix. Years pass in the way they pass on cases that do not resolve, not with a slam, with a slow fade. Evidence gets moved to different storage. Boxes get relabeled. Computers change. Forms change. People retire. And the Green River files stay heavy as ever, because paper does not grieve. You become a steward instead of a hunter. You keep the chain of custody intact like it is a religious practice. You audit property logs. You recheck whether an item was tested and what for and what remains. You re-interview witnesses because memory decays and so do lies. Sometimes a lie falls apart after 10 years because the liar forgets the lie they told. You sit with old reports and realize how much was written by hand, hurried, in rain, at 2 in the morning. You see smudged ink where a detective's thumb dragged through damp paper. Congratulations, you are now trying to make a murder case out of a coffee-stained sentence. Still, you keep at it because what else is there? You also watch science change, slowly, like dawn. Deoxyribonucleic acid testing goes from exotic to usable. Labs start talking about profiles, about comparing biological material in ways that do not rely on guesses. You feel that familiar surge of hope, and you crush it down immediately because hope makes you careless. Careless ruins cases. But you begin identifying which evidence items might hold something modern labs can use. Swabs from victims, clothing that was never washed, ligatures that might have skin cells, anything that might contain semen, saliva, sweat, blood. Those are ugly words, but they are the words that can become truth. You prioritize what was preserved best. Because time is a thief that steals detail first. You learn new vocabulary from lab techs who speak like mechanics, short tandem repeats, profiles, mixtures, degradation. They translate it for you in human terms, enough genetic markers to make a comparison, enough to exclude or include, enough to say, this sample likely came from this person and not from most other people on Earth. That is as close to certainty as your world ever gets. In the 19s, as databases grow, you start thinking in new ways. What if the killer is already in a system somewhere? What if a future arrest for something small will put his deoxyribonucleic acid on file, and the old evidence will finally have a name to match? You find yourself planning for accidents, because that is what modern policing is sometimes, waiting for someone to get caught for being stupid in a different way. Meanwhile, Ridgway keeps living his normal life. That is the part that feels like a personal insult. He is not hiding in a cabin. He is not spiraling into visible madness. He is working, commuting, paying bills, existing like a man who never did anything worse than yell at a waitress. You revisit him periodically because his name never stops being in the file. You check for new complaints. You check for new arrests. You check whether anyone has a new story. Most of the time, you get nothing. And nothing is strangely exhausting. Because nothing does not mean innocent. Nothing means you are blind. Then, the irreversible part of the case happens, and it is not a clue. It is time. Bodies decay. Witnesses move. Memories soften. Victims become names on paper instead of faces in newsprint. The case shifts fully into cold case territory, not because you gave up, but because the world moved on without permission. You keep the files alive anyway. You convert old notes into databases. You enter missing persons information in systems that did not exist when the girls vanished. You recheck dental records, because sometimes identification is just patience with molars. You recheck fingerprints. When you have them, you work with genealogical resources that are still primitive. compared to what will come later. You do all the boring things that someday will matter. This is the part nobody dramatizes, because it looks like a person hunched over a keyboard with stale coffee. But it is also the part where you either save the future case or sabotage it. A mislabeled bag, a missing signature, a swab thrown away because someone thought it was already tested. Those are the tiny tragedies that can protect a killer better than any alibi. So you obsess, you check and recheck, and you become the annoying one in meetings. Where is the evidence stored? Who signed it out? When was it last opened? How is it packaged? Is it dry? Is it sealed? Is it contaminated? Congratulations! You are now the guardian of paper bags. But the bags are the only witnesses that do not forget. As science becomes more routine, you start pulling out specific items for retesting. You coordinate with lab schedules, because labs have backlogs in politics too. You learn that a high-profile case does not always jump the line, not without someone fighting for it. So you fight, quietly, through memos, meetings, and phone calls that end with promises and no dates. You keep reminding people that the evidence is aging, that every year is another year of degradation, that waiting is not neutral. Waiting is loss. In the late 1990s, you finally get the sense that the lab can do something meaningful with what you saved. Not miracles, not television magic, but a real profile from real biological material. If you are lucky, lucky is a cruel word in this case, but you use it anyway. You select items carefully with the lab's guidance. Pieces of clothing where biological stains were documented. Swabs that were preserved in ways that did not destroy cells. You send them off, and you wait in a way that makes you feel like you are holding your breath for months. The calls you get from the lab are cautious, partial profile, mixed sample, not enough to compare. Then, eventually, a better call, a usable profile from a case connected to the series. It is not fireworks. It is not music swelling. It is a tech telling you numbers, like a recipe for a person. You write them down because you have learned never to trust your memory with something this important. The profile goes into the system, and you tell yourself not to fantasize, because a profile without a match is just a ghost with better handwriting. But you also know what it means. You are no longer chasing only the highway. You are chasing a biological signature. And biology does not care how calm a man sounds in an interview room. Biology does not care how normal he looks at the grocery store. If you have his genetic fingerprint, the act of blending in becomes useless. Now, the long waiting turns into a new kind of patience. You monitor for matches, and you live your life in the background of that monitoring. Cases come and go. People move desks. Someone new inherits a stack of Green River binders and asks you to explain, again, why this matters. You explain, again, because repetition is part of the curse. And then, in 2001, the call finally comes in the way you always imagined and never dared to expect. It is quiet. It is a lab voice, controlled, professional, probably sitting under fluorescent lights with a cup of vending machine coffee. They say there is a match. They say the profile is consistent with a man you know, a man you have circled for years, a man who took a polygraph and smiled. Gary Ridgway. For a moment, you do not feel triumph. you feel something colder, because the match does not erase the years. It does not bring anyone back. It does not even tell you how many. It only does one thing. It takes the case out of the swamp of maybe and puts it on dry land. Now you can knock on a door with something in your hand. Now you can say a name out loud and mean it in court. You also know what this means for your next decisions. You cannot rush. A deoxyribonucleic acid match is powerful, but it must be defended. You need confirmatory tests because defense attorneys love attacking process. You need to retest, rerun, and document every step because this man has lived free for decades. You get your team together and the meeting is not celebratory. You sit under humming lights and you treat that lab result like it is glass. Because glass can cut you and it can shatter in court. You spread out the chain of custody like a road map and you start driving it with your finger. Who collected the swab? Who sealed it? Who logged it? Who opened it again? And why? Every signature is a tiny oath, and any missing one is a gift to the defense. You assign someone to do nothing but audit, not investigate, not interview, not chase new leads. Audit, because this is the part where cases die quietly, on technicalities and human shortcuts. The lab tells you they can run confirmatory testing, but you need to pick the best evidence, not the most dramatic, the most intact, the most likely to survive the argument, contamination, degradation, mishandling, all the ways time chews on biology. You make a list and it feels like writing a menu of grief. Victim number by victim number, item by item, swab, vaginal smear slide, underwear, ligature. You keep your voice even because your voice is a tool in meetings like this. But inside, you feel the pressure that has been building since 1982. It has just changed shape. Back then, you needed a name. Now you have a name, and you need an airtight path from that name to a jury. You also need to act like the suspect does not know you finally have teeth, because if he senses it, he runs, or he talks, or he hurts someone else out of spite, which happens more than people like to admit. So you move like you are carrying a cup of coffee across ice. Slow, balanced, no sudden steps. You coordinate with prosecutors early because you are done with surprises. They want to see the lab notes, the protocols, the quality control. They want to know what kind of profile it is and how strong. You explain it in plain language because courts are built for stories, not science. Short tandem repeats, you tell them, are like a barcode made of inherited repeats. The lab reads enough spots in that barcode to compare one person to another. If it matches across enough markers, the odds of a random match drop into the realm of fantasy. Not impossible, just absurd. And absurd is still something a defense attorney will try to sell, if they can. So you do not oversell it. You let the numbers speak, and you build everything else around them. Then comes the next decision, the one that feels like holding your breath. You need a fresh reference sample from Ridgway. A legally obtained one, clean chain, no drama. That means either he volunteers, which is unlikely now, or you take it with a warrant. You plan the warrant like a bank job because the smallest mistake turns into a headline. You get surveillance teams in place and you tell them the goal is not excitement. The goal is predictability. You want to know where he is at all times for a few days. Work, home, gas station, grocery store, any place he might dump evidence if he panics. You also want to know who he talks to, because people do not panic alone. They call wives, girlfriends, co-workers, lawyers, pastors, anyone who will tell them it is going to be okay. And that phone call is often where you hear what matters. So you listen. You sit in an unmarked car, watching his quiet house, and it feels insulting. The lawn is trimmed. The driveway looks like it belongs to a man who complains about neighborhood kids. A porch light clicks on at dusk, steady and normal. You watch him come home from work, shoulders slightly forward, like gravity is personal. He takes out the trash. He checks the mailbox. You have stood over bodies that were hidden like garbage, and here he is, taking out garbage like a citizen. Congratulations, your brain says you are watching the banality of evil in real time. You do not move in yet. Not until the lab finishes confirmatory work. Not until you can say in court that the profile is stable, replicated, and defensible. Not until your warrant paperwork is so clean, it squeaks. Days pass, and every day feels like temptation. You have lived with this case for so long that urgency feels like oxygen. But urgency makes you sloppy, and sloppy is how men like him walk free. The confirmatory call comes, again with no fireworks. The lab says the result is consistent. Again. A second run matches the first. A third check makes it boring. And boring is what you want. Boring science wins trials. Now you write warrants. One for a cheek swab, the modern equivalent of fingerprint ink. One for a search, carefully scoped, because judges do not sign blank checks. You list what you are looking for and why it matters. Vehicles, fibers, ligature materials, any records, any souvenirs, any maps, any notes. You also write warrants for his workplace, because work is where people hide in plain sight. If he is a truck painter, he has access to industrial spaces and solvents, and that matters. You plan the arrest like a dull ritual, because if it looks like a spectacle, you lose control of the narrative. You brief teams, assign roles, designate who speaks, and who stays silent. You decide where to take him, where to process him, where to interview him. You plan the route, because even the drive can become evidence later. A suspect blurting something in a patrol car, a spontaneous statement, a slip, or a claim that you coerced him, intimidated him, tricked him. So you put two people in the room for every crucial step. Not because you do not trust each other, because you do not trust the future. The day you move in is gray, because of course it is. Washington does not do justice under blue skies very often. You watch him leave for work, same as always. He drives like a man who is not worried about police. He is not speeding. He is not checking his mirrors too often. He is just going to his job. You let him get to a place where you can arrest him without turning it into a neighborhood show. A controlled location, open enough for safety, quiet enough for procedure. Then you step out, badges visible, voices calm, no shouting, no hero lines, just a sentence that changes everything. Gary Ridgway, you are under arrest. He looks at you like you mispronounced his name. That slight tilt of confusion, that offended normality. Then he recovers. Quick, he asks why, as if he is being audited by the tax office. You do not argue on the street. You do not explain the whole case because you do not owe him story time. You cuff him, double lock, check fit. You read rights with the same voice you would use for a drunk driver. He does not fight. He does not cry. He does not do anything that makes sense to a person who expects guilt to look like panic. He is calm, again, and that calm makes your skin crawl. You transport him, and it is paperwork, seatbelts, radio updates. A killer is just a man in custody until you prove otherwise in court. At the station, you book him like any other suspect. Photograph, fingerprints, property inventory, shoelaces removed because policy has learned what despair can do. You take the cheek swab under warrant, a cotton swab scraping the inside of his mouth, gentle as a dentist visit. That is the thing. The mechanism of accountability is so small. A few skin cells and decades of hiding start to collapse. You send the swab to the lab under pristine chain, and you do not relax yet, because an arrest is not a conviction. An arrest is a promise that you will now have to keep. The first interview is about control, not confession. You sit across from him in a plain room. No shadows, no drama. Just fluorescent light and a table scarred by other people's stress. He sits upright, hands folded, and he watches you the way a man watches a mechanic. How much will this cost me? What did you find? Can I talk my way out? You do not start with bodies. You start with his life. You ask about his routine, his work, his driving routes. You ask about Pacific Highway South like it is a survey, casual and boring. He answers, and you note the small things. He uses general language when he should have specifics. He minimizes. He admits to solicitation again, as if repeating it makes it harmless. He tries the same tactic from the 1980s, confess to the small wrong to inoculate against the big wrong. So you let him talk, and you let him feel like he is managing the room. Then you pivot. You do not slam evidence down. You do not shout. You just ask one question. Soft. Do you know why we are here, Gary? He says no. Of course he does. And you watch his eyes, because eyes go first when a man lies, even when his voice is trained. You tell him you have DNA, not in a triumphant way, in a factual way, like reading a weather report. His posture changes by millimeters. His shoulders stiffen, then settle. He blinks more. He asks what that means, and you realize he might not fully understand the weapon that finally found him. That happens sometimes with men who lived through the era of maybes. They still think science is guesswork. They still think they can talk around it. You explain it in a sentence. It means your biology is on a victim, and the odds of coincidence are absurd. He goes quiet, not angry quiet, calculating quiet. That is when you understand what you are really dealing with. Not a man driven by frenzy, a man driven by cost and benefit, a man who treats murder like a private habit and consequences like a negotiable fee. He asks for a lawyer. You expected that. You stop questioning immediately because you are not here to be clever. You are here to win, and winning means doing it clean. While he sits, waiting for counsel, you start the next phase, searches. You hit his home with the warrant team, methodical and quiet. You photograph everything before you touch it, because defense attorneys love the phrase, planted. You look for ligature materials, and you find plenty, because most homes have rope and twine. You look for women's items, and you find some things that raise eyebrows. But eyebrows do not convict. You look for evidence of violence, and time has scrubbed most of it away. You search vehicles, seats, carpet, trunks, scenes where skin cells hide. You collect what you can, and you know most of it will be negative. Negative does not mean innocent. Negative means he had decades to clean. At his workplace, you look for traces that could tie to the corridor. Fibers, paint, unusual stains. The place smells like chemicals and routine. Men joke by the break room, not because they know, but because people joke to keep the world normal. You feel like you are walking through a stage set, and only you know the script is wrong. The lab work begins again, now on everything you collected. Swabs from steering wheels, swabs from carpet, the modern world's version of dusting. You do not count on any one item. You build redundancy because redundancy is how you survive cross-examination. Then comes the heavy shift, the one you cannot pretend is technical. Once Ridgway is in custody, the question becomes, how many? You sit with the old files, and the victims stop being pins on a board. They become a ledger you must balance. Missing women from that era, some never found. Remains recovered, but not identified. Cases that were always suspected but never proven. You start creating categories, because that is what police work becomes at this scale. Confirmed by DNA, strongly suspected by circumstance, possible, unknown. Each category is a different kind of ache. The prosecutor asks you, how many counts can we charge now? Not because they do not care, because they have to build a case that will not collapse. You pick the strongest ones first, the ones with biological evidence that ties to him, the ones with clear chain, the ones that are hardest to explain away. You do not like it because it feels like ranking the dead, but you also know a failed prosecution risks everything. So you choose certainty, and you promise yourself you will come back for the rest. You sit in meetings where the word count is used, and it sounds disgusting. How many victims can we prove? How many counts before the jury drowns in detail? How many before appeals turn it into a circus? You hate that the system has to think like this. You also understand why it does. A case of this size can choke itself if you are not careful. You go back to Ridgway again after his lawyer advises him. Now, the interview becomes a negotiation. Without admitting it, is negotiation. He knows you have him on at least one case. He wants to know how much you have and what you will offer. You want to know where the bodies are, how many, and what he did with the ones you never found. You sit across from him, and you keep your voice low. You talk like this is work, because for him it was. You ask him about a specific victim, one tied by DNA. He denies. You show him you are not asking, you are stating. He changes tactics from denial to partial admission. He says he picked up women. He says he had sex. He says maybe things got out of hand. Maybe is the word guilty men love because it makes murder sound like weather. You do not let him hide in. Maybe you pin him to details. Only the killer should know. Where did you go after you left the highway? Which exit? Which road? What did you see? What did you do with her clothes? He hesitates, and the hesitation is the crack you need. Because if he guesses, he can be wrong. If he knows, he can be verified. Verification is how you turn confession into evidence. He starts offering information like it is a bargaining chip, a location, a description of a tree line, a memory of a ravine. But he does it in pieces because he wants to control the faucet. He wants to drip truth, not pour it. Congratulations! You are now negotiating with a man who thinks human remains are currency. You do not show disgust. Disgust is a reaction, and reactions feed him. You keep him on a leash made of questions. You ask for specifics. What season? What weather? What direction the car faced? How far you walked? What you used as a ligature? He answers some, dodges others. He is testing what you know. And you learn something crucial. He has been waiting for this moment, not for punishment, for attention, for the chance to be the author of the story again. You deny him the author role, and you make him a source. A source can be checked. A source can be contradicted. A source can be used. He wants to be a genius. You treat him like a filing cabinet with bad morals. Outside the interview room, your team starts verifying everything he says. If he mentions a dump site, you pull maps, old reports. You compare his claimed method to injuries, documented ligature types, positioning. You watch for the tale of a false confessor, the man who borrows from headlines. But this is not headlines. This is dirt roads you never wrote down publicly. This is a specific pullout, a specific turn, a detail about a gate that was there then and gone now. Those are the details that make you feel cold again, because they confirm what you already believed, and they make it real in a new way. He is not guessing. He is remembering. The next obstacle is not finding truth. It is managing it. Families have waited for decades, and now you are supposed to tell them the killer is in custody. But you cannot yet tell them everything, because everything is still evidence, still fragile. You coordinate with victim advocates, because detectives are not built to hold grief carefully. You learn how to say, "We have an arrest," without saying, "We have closure." Because closure is not a police product. It is something families try to assemble from scraps. The media swarms because the Green River name never really died. It just went dormant, like a fever. Now it spikes again. Reporters call, demanding confirmation, demanding details, demanding to know how you missed him for so long. You want to say, "We did not miss him. We lacked the tool to prove it." But you also know the public does not love nuance. So you speak in procedure, because procedure is the only language that survives tomorrow. You tell them the lab work is ongoing, and the case is active, and you will not compromise it for a headline. They push anyway, because pushing is their job. They ask how many victims, and you give them the answer that makes everyone angry. You do not know yet. The real answer is worse. You might never know exactly. In the war room, you lay out the next problem like a body on a table. You have a suspect in cuffs and decades of missing women behind him. You also have a court that wants clean counts, clean dates, clean stories. And you have a killer who wants to turn that mess into leverage. The prosecutors start talking about the death penalty, because that is what the public expects. You listen, and you feel the old fatigue rise. The death penalty is not just a sentence. It is a legal hurricane, automatic appeals, years of motions, families forced to relive everything again and again as defense teams pull at every seam. You have the evidence to charge murders. Do you have the evidence to survive 15 years of counterpunching? That is the math nobody wants to see on television. You sit with the deputy prosecutor and you go through the cases like you are triaging wounds. Which victims have the strongest biological evidence? Which cases have the cleanest chain of custody? Which recoveries have the best documentation, the clearest link from scene to shelf? Because a jury can handle grief. A jury cannot handle disorganization. And disorganization is how a guilty man becomes a cautionary tale about reasonable doubt. Ridgway stays in the jail, quiet and contained. But you do not mistake that for surrender. Men like him do not surrender. They bargain. They wait for you to need something. Then they charge interest. The first time he offers real cooperation, it comes wrapped in ego. He does not say, "I am sorry." He says, "I can help you." He says it like he is offering directions to a lost tourist. Congratulations. You are now sitting across from a man who thinks he is the helpful one. You and the prosecutors set the terms carefully. No deals in the hallway. No casual promises. Everything in writing, everything supervised, every claim verified. Because if you give him a single inch of narrative control, he will build a house on it. He starts with a number, or something like a number. He hints, he shrugs, he underplays, then overplays, watching your reaction. You keep your face flat. You ask him for locations instead. Specific places, specific turns, specific landmarks that can be checked. He wants to be feared. You make him be useful. The first map session is not a movie moment. It is a dull room, a stack of aerial photos, and a man pointing like he is choosing a restaurant. He taps a spot near the river, then another along a wooded embankment. He talks about access roads, pullouts, trails that used to exist. He mentions gates that were chained back then and fences that were not yet installed. You write it all down because the human mind lies, but paper at least lies consistently. Then you do the hardest part. You call the search teams. You call the medical examiner. You call the property room. You pull old case numbers and you match them to his claims. If he says a body was placed near a certain bend, you check whether a body was found there. If he says he used a certain kind of ligature, you check the autopsy notes. And when the details line up, when his memory matches what only the killer would know, you feel your stomach tighten. Not triumph, recognition. Like hearing a voice you have hated for years and realizing it was in the room the whole time. The prosecutors keep circling the same question. Can we get him to plead? Because a trial means putting every victim on display, one by one, with defense attorneys trying to make the dead look responsible for their own murders. A plea means certainty. A plea means no appeals circus. A plea also means the word bargain, and families do not sleep well with that word. You sit in meetings with victim advocates, and the air feels heavier than it should. These advocates have a job that is part social work, part "I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request," law enforcement, part grief translator, and part shield between families and the machine. You watch them choose words the way bomb technicians choose tools. Not because the truth is fragile, but because people are. They tell you again and again that families will ask the same two questions first. Is it really him? And where is she? You can answer the first with science now. You cannot always answer the second. And that is where the bargain starts to smell rotten. Because the only person who knows where all the bodies are is the man who put them there. And he knows you need those locations more than you need his feelings. So the system does what it always does when it needs something from the worst person in the room. It negotiates, not with friendliness, not with forgiveness, with contracts and leverage. You sit in a conference room with prosecutors, binders stacked like bricks. The death penalty is on the table, heavy and symbolic. And so is a quieter option, life without parole, clean and final. You think the public wants the needle, or the headline, or the cinematic end? Wrong. What families keep asking for is simpler. They want him to stop taking up air in their imagination. They want names matched to remains. They want a place to stand and say, "Here." The prosecutor lays it out with a kind of calm that only comes from experience. If you seek death, you may get it, but you will pay for it with decades of appeals. If you accept life without parole, you can lock him away now. And if he cooperates, you can recover victims while there is still anything to recover. That last clause lands like a bruise, because time has already been chewing on these scenes for 20 years. Sun, rain, moss, animals, construction, new trails cut through old woods. Every season rearranges the evidence like someone shuffling cards. So you weigh certainty against vengeance, and you hate that you have to choose. Then you look at the families through the lens you have learned to use. Not what feels satisfying to you. What reduces harm tomorrow? The plea discussions begin, and you are not in charge, but you are never absent. You feed prosecutors what they need, which is proof and pressure points and the limits of proof. You explain what can be charged cleanly and what will always be a fight. You remind them that Ridgway does not confess out of conscience. He confesses when it benefits him or when it makes him feel important. So you build a deal that turns his ego into a shovel. The agreement takes shape, slow and ugly. He pleads guilty to a long list of murders. In exchange, the death penalty comes off the table. He gets life without parole, with no possibility of release, and he is required to cooperate fully, truthfully, in locating victims and confirming details. Truthfully is a nice word. Truthfully is also unenforceable in a man who treats truth like pocket change. So you add your own enforcement, verification. If he gives a location, you search. If he gives a method, you match it to the record. If he lies, you document the lie and you take away the only thing he wants: attention. When the deal is finalized in 2003, it does not feel like victory. It feels like choosing which kind of pain you can survive. The courtroom is full, not with drama, but with people who have carried grief for decades. Ridgway stands, ordinary in a way that still makes your teeth grit. He answers to charges with a flat voice. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Each guilty lands differently in the room. Some families flinch like they have been hit. Some families go still, the way people go still when something breaks inside them and they refuse to show it. You watch the judge sentence him, and the words are long and formal, designed to sound like control. Life without parole. No freedom. No end date. But the sentence is not the end of the work. It is the beginning of the scavenger hunt he left behind. Because now you have to go back out there, back to the woods and river edges, with the killer in custody. And you have to trust him just enough to follow directions without ever trusting him as a person. The first time you transport him for a search, you feel the strangeness in your bones. He is in restraints, surrounded by deputies, moved like cargo. He looks out the window like a commuter, and you want to ask him how he can stand the scenery, but you do not ask. You do not give him conversation he did not earn. You arrive at a site he indicates, a place that looks like nothing to a passerby. A patch of trees, a slope, brush thick enough to hide anything. He points, and he describes what he did with the casual tone of a man recalling a parking spot. Over there, down a little, past the stump that used to be bigger. He talks in landmarks that time has erased, and you realize the only stable thing here is his memory, which is not comforting. You call in the search team. They grid the area, slow, deliberate, like people looking for a lost ring. Except the lost thing is a person. The first shovel hits earth, and the sound is dull and final. Soil peels back in layers. Roots grab at everything. The air smells green, wet, alive, and it should not smell alive on a day like this. Then someone finds something that changes the way they breathe. A fragment, a bone, a piece of clothing fused to dirt. Recoveries are never neat. The public imagines a body lying intact, waiting patiently. Wrong. What you find is often partial, scattered, weathered, carried. You bag what you can. You photograph. You mark coordinates. You document like the future is watching, because it is. Ridgway watches too. Sometimes he watches with a blank face. Sometimes he watches with a faint interest, like he is checking whether the directions worked. You do not let him near the dig. You keep him back because you are not giving him proximity to his work, but you still have to listen to him because he is the map you hate needing. Search after search follows, and each one is its own small war with time. Some sites produce remains. Some produce nothing. And you have to decide what nothing means. Nothing can mean he lied. Nothing can mean the area changed. A road built, a ravine filled, a river shifted. Nothing can mean animals moved everything out of your grid. Congratulations! You are now investigating the landscaping decisions of the last 20 years. The medical examiner becomes your partner in the grimest way. They take what you recover and they do the slow work of identification. Dental records when they exist. Old fingerprints when someone bothered to take them. DNA, if there is enough left to test. Sometimes all you can do is narrow it to a likely person based on missing reports and circumstances. And sometimes you get a name, clear and confirmed, and the room goes quiet like a church. Because a name means you have to call someone. You have to tell a mother, or a sister, or a grown child who has lived their whole life with a question mark. Those notifications do not get easier with time. They get stranger. You are calling about a girl who disappeared before the recipient had gray hair. You are calling to confirm what they suspected and still could not accept. You do it with an advocate beside you because two people can hold more grief than one. You listen to the silence on the line. You listen to breathing turn uneven. You answer the questions you can. Where was she found? Was she alone? Was it quick? You do not speculate. You do not decorate. You tell the truth in pieces, because truth in one large piece can crush people. Some families thank you, and you hate that they have to. Some families scream, and you understand that too. Some hang up, and you respect it. The searches continue, and Ridgway's cooperation reveals its pattern. He remembers some locations with disturbing clarity. He forgets others, or claims to. He offers corrections that feel like control, moving you 10 yards left, then 20 yards right. He enjoys being needed, and you can feel it in the way he answers when you ask the same question twice. He wants you to see him as essential. So you make your questions clinical, and you keep your face bored. You do not reward him with horror. You reward him only with the next step, and only when the last step checked out. When he tries to rewrite his own history, you pin him down with documents, autopsy notes, recovery photos, dates, and times. He will claim he killed someone one way, and you will show him evidence it was another. He will shrug and say he does not remember, and you will think, of course you do not. For him, they were not landmarks in a life. They were errands. Still, the ledger starts to shift from unknown to known. A missing persons file becomes a recovered victim. An unidentified set of remains gains a name, and a family gains a grave they can visit. It is progress, and it never feels like enough, because for every recovery, there is another name that stays in the missing column. And every time you hit a dead end, you have to look at the man in restraints and wonder if the dead end is nature or cruelty. The plea deal requires him to be truthful, but truth is a slippery standard. You cannot open his skull and check his memory. You can only check the world, and the world has been changing without asking you. You drive to places he describes and find subdivisions. You find new roads, new fences, new parks. You stand where he claims he walked into brush, and now there is a playground with fresh bark chips. You feel the urge to tell the parents pushing swings, what used to be here, you do not. You keep the poison contained because society keeps functioning by not knowing everything. In the aftermath, the task force becomes a different kind of unit. Less chase, more accounting. You correct files because old case numbers were wrong. You merge reports from agencies that did not share systems back then. You update missing persons entries, and you link them to confirmed victims. You review old evidence one more time because now you know who you are looking at, and that changes what matters. A fiber that was meaningless becomes meaningful if it matches his work environment. A paint fleck becomes a question if it resembles what he handled daily. You also confront the reality of what did not work. The early polygraph that raised flags but could not make cuffs. The searches that yielded nothing chargeable at the time. The witness descriptions that were too average to be useful. You do not rewrite history to make yourselves look better. You document it honestly because future cases depend on honest lessons. Preserve biology. Maintain chain of custody like it is sacred. Do not assume a case will stay hot long enough to solve itself. And do not underestimate the camouflage of normal. Some families attend sentencing and watch him with faces like stone. Some cannot be in the same room. Some bring photos because a courtroom is designed to focus on the defendant, and they refuse to let him be the center. You notice how the system keeps calling the women victims, like that is their only title. You make yourself remember their names because names are the smallest form of justice you can still give. The media asks about numbers. Again, because numbers are easier than lives. How many did he kill? He is convicted of 49. He is suspected of more. He claimed more at different times, then walked it back, then smirked when people argued over it. You learn to speak carefully. Confirmed is one category. Suspected is another. And unknown is the one that keeps you awake, because unknown means there might be women you never connected to him. Women whose disappearances were filed under runaway or drifted into the cracks of the system. Women who never got a search party because nobody had money for posters. As years pass after the plea, the case becomes quieter, but it never becomes clean. There are still remains in evidence that cannot be identified yet. There are still families who call every few years asking if technology improved again. Sometimes it does, and you retest, and you get a partial profile that finally matches. Sometimes it does not, and you have to tell them you are still waiting. That is a special kind of cruelty, waiting on science like it is a bus that might never come. Ridgway sits in prison, and the public imagines that means the story is done. But the detective in you knows better. A conviction closes a case file. It does not close the questions. You are left with the sick geometry of it all, the way he used ordinary roads and ordinary manners. You think monsters look like monsters. Wrong. This one looked like a coworker, a neighbor, a man you would nod at in a parking lot. And the reason the case was baffling for so long is not because the clues were non-existent. It is because the clues were buried under the most common mask in the world: normal. You picture the evidence room, those paper bags lined up like mute witnesses. You picture a single swab taken decades earlier, stored dry because some tired detective followed procedure. That swab outlived the lies. It outlived the calm interviews and the bland smile and the old maybes. In the end, that is what cracked him. Not brilliance, not luck alone. Patience, preservation, and a science that finally learned how to say a name. Still, even with all that, the ending is not a clean slam of a door. There are dump sites that produced nothing. There are missing women who fit the timeline and never came home and never got found. There are claims he made that cannot be verified because the landscape changed or because he enjoyed sending you in circles. And there is the question you do not like saying out loud because it feels like inviting a storm. Was he always the only one? Most evidence points to him. But cases this large teach you humility, and humility is just honesty with bruises. So you keep the files, you keep the samples, you keep the open spaces in the database where an unidentified profile can someday become a person again. And when you drive past Pacific Highway South now, the neon still buzzes. Cars still move like thoughts you cannot stop. The river still slides under bridges, carrying silt and secrets downstream. You tell yourself that this time, the ordinary man did not get away with it. Then you remember how long he did, and you realize the most unsettling part is not what he did in the dark. It is how easily he did it in the light, until a single, quiet lab result finally taught the truth how to speak. The highway keeps glowing, the river keeps moving, and somewhere, in a box